So the government of New Zealand has recently announced its plans to gradually reintroduce some sort of border entry in the first quarter of next year. Has this given the sector a little bit of sort of light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody felt cheered up about it, not just about the fact that it was probably going to be happening, but just that there was a change. any change of the status quo was good, but also it still looks like a reasonably realistic plan. The government looks fairly determined to do it, so that was really good news.
Excellent. This was actually the most read news story on our website over the last couple of weeks, which indicates certainly a bit of interest from the agency market. Has there been any early impact in terms of sort of inquiries?
I wouldn't say a lot. We actually had a full English New Zealand Zoom meeting on Thursday, and I asked around, and a few schools that had a couple of inquiries. We had a couple, but we couldn't really relate it directly to the news. I suppose part of it is people just not pushing it out really hard at the moment either, until we know a little bit more about what's happening.
Yeah, being a little bit cautious. Yeah, sure. But what is English New Zealand hoping for between now and when the borders open, hopefully early next year, but both in terms of the sort of infrastructure to welcome students and the sort of ongoing support for providers?
I think in terms of infrastructure, we're reasonably confident that on the visa side of things that we handle fairly smoothly. I mean, they've done a couple of cohorts of university students over the last year, and for PhD students and then degree level students, and visa processing doesn't seem to have been the issue there. They've been handled quickly. It may be different when it scales up significantly, but so far that doesn't seem to be an issue. So, normally we'd have concerns about the visa processing. I'm reasonably confident they'll figure out a way to do that at the speed that we need it. We'll probably need some sort of clearer guidance on what kind of isolation facilities will be established ahead of reopening, because even when we do reopen, the barrier for the hurdle for isolation-free entry is going to be fairly high. It'll be countries that have basically got no COVID and are fully vaccinated that will be allowed in isolation-free. So the next level will be just shorter isolation periods, and say 3 days to a week. And we're not quite sure how that'll be handled and at what cost at the moment. I mean, a week in isolation here costs €1,500. So it's going to be a bit of a disincentive if it's up in that level. So we'd like some, clarity about what's going to happen there. I don't know how realistic it is to expect isolation-free travel completely at the moment. It may be that events overtake everybody, and COVID's endemic everywhere, including here, and so there's less concern about isolation at the border. But it may also be that people are still trying to keep it out, and there'll be managed isolation for another 6 months to a year into the new year. So that's in terms of bringing people in. I think we'll be okay once they start coming. In terms of support to get us there, we certainly need more in the language school sector. Those of us who are more or less 100% international students and haven't had any new people over the border for 15 to 18 months now. Yeah. Certainly need some more support. We got really generous support in New Zealand from the government up until June. But for our sector, we actually had to use any support that we had by the end of June, bizarrely. We weren't allowed to hold on to it. We weren't allowed to eke it out. If we had any left over, we had to give it back. Oh. So that's kind of different from, for example, the school sector, the high schools and primary schools who were funded for the year. Seems rather unfair to us. It's good on them for giving the schools that kind of that level of funding. They not only got 4 times as much as us, but they were allowed to use it over a longer period. So we would like that kind of remedied, shall we say. Another 6 months of financial support would be very useful to getting as many schools as possible to the reopening, because having a hollowed out sector to provide for the international market wouldn't be good for any of us. We all want to be there together. So we would like more support. We're basically getting none at the moment at all. And we are talking to government about it, but with the typical government sense of urgency on these things, it's moving pretty slowly.
And what is the current situation then for language schools? You said there's sort of no support. So there's this kind of hibernation scheme. Is that still ongoing?
Yeah. So a few more schools, a handful more schools have gone into hibernation since in the last few weeks because the June year funding ran out. And there may be a couple more others that follow. I suppose about somewhere around a quarter to a third of English New Zealand members would be in hibernation now. And others are struggling. It's not easy. I mean, it is a global issue, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hopefully the border news comes true, and you can get some students there soon, and get some students in the schools and get the schools reopened again.
I would stress we're a pretty resilient bunch, and people will be hanging in there. The sector won't look too different, I don't imagine, in March, just with smaller schools. But everybody I imagine we'll be kicking into reasonable business from March now. That's certainly what we're planning for in my school. That it looks quite realistic that the borders will be opening in some form early next year, and we'll be in good nick to take them.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you for speaking to us, Darren. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome, Matt. Thanks.